What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. In just 1 week, two alleged Putin's allies went through potentially historic changes. The first one was Syria. Tahrir al-Sham and the Free Syrian Army launched a large-scale offensive from the Idlib governorate. Their target was Aleppo, Syria's largest city. The offensive was successful, becoming the example for Putin what does a 3-day war should look like. The offensive did not stop there. The militants pushed south into the Hama governorate, approaching its capital city of 900,000 residents. They seized ammunition depots, air bases, military hardware, and numerous towns along the way, threatening the crucial Aleppo-Damascus highway. The second event worth talking about in today's video was the recent mass protests in Georgia that have captured international attention. The ruling Georgian Dream Party decision to pause its progress for European Union accession has not only sparked internal dissent, but also carries significant implications for the broader region, including potentially Russia. Both these countries, Syria and Georgia, were previously, and still are by some, seen as Russia's allies. People claim that they received direct support from Putin, and that some Russian infiltrators tried to change the political course of these countries, so that to match the one favorable for Putin. That is why these two events are particularly important to know and understand, since it directly affects the regime of Putin. And what if I told you there is another, third country, which tries to exploit the moment of Putin's weakness, which honestly should not come as a surprise, since the world of politics is built on betrayals, fake alliances, and lies. Putin thought he has strong friends who can resist both outside and internal dangers with ease, since Russia can always come to their help and solve the problems. But it turns out that the world of strength that Putin imagines around himself is not that strong at all, and so-called enemies from the West are closing in with every day passing. The roots of Syria's current political problems can be traced back to the tragic event of January 1994, a car accident that claimed the life of Bashar al-Assad, the eldest son of then-President Hafez al-Assad. Bashar was being raised with a single goal in his life, to succeed his father, embodying the continuity of authoritarian rule in Syria. His unexpected death forced the Assad family to turn to Bashar al-Assad, Bassal's younger brother. And at the time, Bashar was a trained ophthalmologist, completing his postgraduate studies in the Western Eye Hospital in London. So, immersed in his medical career and life in Europe, Bashar had shown little interest in Middle Eastern politics, for a reason. Despite his lack of political ambition, Bashar returned to Syria to assume the role of an heir. Following the father's death in 2000, Bashar was surprisingly elected president in an uncontested election. Initially, he presented himself as a reformer, offering a facade of modernization and openness. His British-born wife, Asma al-Assad, further bolstered this image, connecting the regime to Western ideologies. However, beneath this image, the Assad family tightened its grip on power. Widespread corruption, nepotism, and the suppression of dissent became the regime itself, sowing seeds of discontent among the population. In January 2011, the wave of the Arab Spring reached Syria, igniting protests against Assad regime's corruption and authoritarianism. At first, Bashar al-Assad considered implementing modest reforms, such as granting limited political representation and easing certain oppressive laws. But his family opposed any concessions, advocating for a forceful response, which only escalated tensions dramatically. The government's actions transformed peaceful protests into an armed uprising. Soldiers who left the Syrian military created the Free Syrian Army, united in their goal to overthrow the Assad regime. The conflict quickly evolved into a complex civil war. External actors, most notably Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, saw an opportunity to influence the outcome, each pursuing their own strategic interests. These nations provided support to different opposition groups, further complicating the conflict's dynamics. In response, the Assad government asked for help from international allies. Iran and pro-Iranian militias provided ground support, and Russia's military intervention in 2015 proved to be extremely useful. What a surprise here. Putin wants to protect authoritarians wherever they are in the world. Syria, a country that Russia almost never had anything in common and to deal with, now suddenly became our brothers are in danger. We have to protect them at all costs. Sounds familiar, right? The propaganda machine started working 24/7, and I even remember my own babushka being very concerned about the safety of our Muslim brother Bashar al-Assad. Leveraging this support, the regime recaptured key territories, including Palmyra and DSE's Azor, and broke into the siege of Aleppo after a prolonged and devastating battle in late 2016. Since then, Russia and Syria, or better say the regimes of Putin and Bashar, became very good friends. And only recently, approximately 1 week ago, Syria again captured the media's attention. I'm sure you guys know the details, but long story short, Aleppo, the second biggest city, fell in a record time. Even with the supposed support by Putin, Bashar al-Assad was not able to do much. And now, if you think about it, became one of the first, if not so obvious, signs of Putin's weakness. His entire power is based on promises and demonstration of strength. That's why other, much smaller and less influential countries turn to Putin when they feel like they're about to go through difficulties. All of them expected that Putin will be able to protect them. And well, apparently, Putin is not as almighty as they thought. Not only enemies see it, other political allies witness it as well. And some even decided to take advantage of this Putin's moment of weakness. And one of such countries is Turkey. Despite the diminished influence of extremist groups, Turkey remained a significant player in the Syrian conflict. Under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey pursued a neo-Ottoman vision, aiming to extend its influence over former Ottoman territories, including parts of the northern Syria. Erdogan expressed concerns over Kurdish autonomy along a Turkish southern border, fearing it could inspire separatism within Turkey's own Kurdish population. In 2019, Turkish forces launched an incursion into northern Syria, targeting Kurdish-held areas and supporting opposition groups, such as Tahrir al-Sham and the Free Syrian Army. Tahrir al-Sham, which evolved from the Nusra Front, has been designated as a terroristic organization by several countries due to its extremist ideology and actions. And though Turkey officially distanced itself from such groups, allegations persist regarding its support for them to counter Kurdish influence and the Assad regime. That was one of the very first times when Putin faced the dilemma of who to support, since two of his allies were fighting one another. And not being able to confidently take anyone's side, Putin showed weakness. Which showed his other allies that you cannot always rely on Putin to solve your problems. The current offensive from the Idlib Governorate also emphasizes Turkey's strategic ambitions. The militia's rapid advance, facilitated by Turkish backing, already shows big results. They have seized critical infrastructure, including military bases and the Aleppo-Damascus highway, disrupting supply lines and threatening government-held territories. The offensive also endangers Kurdish communities, who have been pivotal in fighting against the extremist groups and advocating proper governance and equal rights. The response of Putin and the entire Russian propaganda to all these events? Nothing. Nothing happened at all. This is their own internal conflict, we won't interfere. But what about our brother, Bashar al-Assad, you might ask? Bashar who? The second country, supposed ally of Putin, is Georgia. And when I say ally, I mostly refer to the government, not the people, because some very pro-Russian activists and authorities started to gain traction in building the future of this country. The ruling Georgian Dream Party recently secured a convincing victory in general elections. The election itself is not seen by all the people of Georgia as fair. That is already a very obvious sign and similarity to the regime of Putin. But what made people truly furious are the proposals and vision of this political party, which includes the delay or even the entire cancellation of the integration with the Eurozone, and policies that mirror Russian laws, such as the ones affecting LGBTQ+ rights and foreign agents. The government's decision to halt its EU accession, I'd say, was the biggest reason that has ignited widespread protests. Many citizens fear that this move undermines their future prospects and aligns the country too closely with Russia. The protesters argue that the government's actions are steering Georgia away from democratic values and European integration, which they believe are essential for economic prosperity and political freedom. For Russians, particularly those who oppose their own government's policies, Georgia holds significant importance as well. The country has become a haven for Russian anti-war immigrants, serving both as a temporary refuge and a permanent home for many. The political developments in Georgia have a direct impact on these individuals and the broader Russian community engaged in political activism. Comparisons have been made between Georgia's protests and other regional movements, such as the 2020 Belarusian presidential election and Ukraine's 2014 Euromaidan. In Belarus, for example, widespread electoral fraud kept Lukashenko, a very undesirable by his own people dictator, in power. While in Ukraine, a sudden pivot away from European integration sparked public outrage. If you remember, the Ukrainian president at that time, Viktor Yanukovych, while almost literally boarding the plane to fly and sign the documents that would have accepted Ukraine into the European Union, suddenly turned around and cancelled all these plans. Many people, rightfully so, thought that he received an order from Putin not to do it. And being more or less a pro-Russian president, he obeyed the command. The people of Ukraine did not forgive him and took him out of power. And while the reason for Georgian protests is not extremely outrageous as the one in Ukraine, people are still rightfully angry. They see where following Putin's paths leads countries, and they do not want the same thing to happen to their homeland. And just like with Syria, the response of the Russian authorities, propaganda, and Putin himself to unfolding events in Georgia is non-existent. Most likely the pro-Russian party expects him to intervene in case the situation gets south quickly. But the situation in Syria already went out of control. Did Putin do anything? Absolutely nothing. To better understand the situation, it is useful to consider the white knight, black knight theory, which examines how larger countries assert influence over their smaller neighbors. In essence, powerful nations often project their political systems, laws, and ideologies onto less powerful ones. When a dominant regional power is a democracy, it tends to encourage democratic practices in neighboring countries. On the other hand, if the leading nation is authoritarian, surrounding countries may adopt similar governance styles, either by choice or by force. Not surprisingly, the force usually comes from the outside. But the current reality is far from this ideal. Russia, under Vladimir Putin's leadership, has adopted an increasingly authoritarian stance, exerting pressure on neighboring countries to align with its governance model. This Black Knight approach leaves Georgia in a very difficult position, forced to choose between embracing European integration, which also comes with its own risks, or maintaining a cautious relationship with Russia to avoid potential consequences from Putin. The government does not want to provoke Putin, while the people want to do nothing in common with this person. As a result, we have a conflict, which ended in huge protests. The decision for politicians is not merely about economic interests, but also about the security and national survival. Georgia, unfortunately, has a painful memory of 2008 Russian invasion, a reminder of the consequences of going against a powerful neighbor. But you cannot simply obey and do whatever the other country representatives tell you. The sovereignty of any country is its most valuable thing, both in terms of the territory and the ability to make its own decisions and rule as they see fit. If Russia constantly tells Georgia what to do and what not to do, this country basically loses its independence and becomes the subject of Russia. Not officially at first, but later on this can become the ground of a so-called referendum that Putin loves so much, whether Georgia needs to become a part of Russia or not. And we all know how these referendums end up. So yeah, I can clearly understand the frustration of the regular people of Georgia and unwillingness to give even the slightest advantage to Putin. You let him inside your country in any way, shape or form, and then it will be impossible to take him out. So people went to the streets, to protests, to show other nations, especially Russians, that you can go against the decisions of the government that you do not like. And they also clearly use anti-Putin banners during these rallies to directly confront Putin. that he should get his hands away from Georgia, Ukraine and other countries. The absence of response from Putin once again shows his weakness in my opinion. He has so much on his plate right now that most likely he will let Georgians decide the fate of their own country by themselves, as it always should be. And this can become yet another example of successful confrontation of Putin. Hopefully more countries stop being afraid of him and start resisting him, until eventually the people of Russia see that he is just a man after all, a man who should not be feared. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel. If you wish to support my work through donations, there is a PayPal link down below. Thanks so much for watching, and see you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.